All right, Val Town changelog, April 2nd, 2026. This is the first such changelog. We used to have it as part of a newsletter section, and recently we've been sort of deconstructing that newsletter into different parts. So we have the Talk of the Town blogs, and those highlight what people are building in the community, so both at work and personally on Val Town. And then recently, Steve published his first investor update, and that's sort of a behind the scenes into the strategy and how Val Town's going as a company. The next one will be out any day now, so you can read that. And then the newsletter itself sort of collects what's best from each month. So you can sign up at newsletter.val.town. And of course, the sign up page itself is powered by Val. And this connects to Loops, the Loops email API. And that's how we run that. So enough housekeeping. I'll now get into what's actually changed. And this is since early March, so a lot has changed in Val Town. And one of the main themes is, of course, Townie and our MCP server and just sort of everything AI. And I really liked Jim Nielsen's sort of framing of all this, which is in terms of AX, DX, and UX, with the importance being the reverse of that order, where UX is most important, and then DX and AX, AX meaning agent experience. And so for Val Town, it exists foremost for developers, but increasingly that means for your LLM, wherever you get your AI. And so along those lines, we improved the Townie system prompt in the last week or so. And thanks to Michael from SourceBot for sort of nudging us in that direction. But without getting into all the different changes, the system prompt is public and you can look through it. It's actually kind of a nice crash course for how Val Town works, like what the platform offers, how the runtime works with Dino, and then also a lot of opinionated patterns. So that's sort of a more recent update where the system prompt includes things like when you should reach for a fully server-side rendered front-end architecture, maybe with Hano versus more like client-side React. All sorts of useful opinionated patterns like that. And definitely let us know if you have any feedback on that. We're still iterating. So next up, Claude Code hallucinations. So the Val Town MCP server, similar to the system prompt, it's useful for any MCP clients to know the different quirks and gotchas and just constraints of the Val Town platform and runtime, and then also features. So now the MCP server instructions that get sent when the connection begins include more of that. And that sort of cuts down on hallucinations for Claude Code or whatever other MCP client you're using. Speaking of which, Codex has been a more and more popular choice with the Val Town MCP server. You can also use these tools with the Val Town CLI, but we sort of recommend Townie first and then the MCP server because it can always improve and be updated. And then the CLI is sort of the last option. And thanks to Ash and Artie and David for pointing out a couple ways we can make the Codex login flow smoother. So try that out and let us know. We have some new docs instructions for Codex that you can follow. And then back to Townie. So I'll show the new UI mode, which is full screen Townie. So previously you had just Townie in the sidebar, and now you can toggle full screen. And so the full screen mode is more like Claude Code or Codex, where you have sort of code in the background, not really at the forefront. And then, of course, the legacy Townie on the sidebar is more like a Copilot or cursor chat. I'm always interested why there are so many C's among all the AI coding tools. So now, either way is open to you, sidebar or full screen. I'll jump back there to show another new Townie update, which is that you can add context to different vals explicitly, right down here, and then same thing in the sidebar. Townie could already see which page, which val you were using or viewing rather, but now you could just make it explicit so you know that you and Townie are on the same page with whatever you're working on. Let's see what's next. So Townie can now read blob storage. Yeah, so previously the blob storage metadata was viewable by Townie and by extension the MCP server. which is how Townie reads that blob content. And adding this capability means that Townie and the MCP server now have about 36 tools. So for example, just talking persistence, like Townie can already read all your SQLite data. It can read your logs for all your vals. And so this is kind of like one of the extensions there to make it more capable. Another Townie related change is that new users see a Townie sort of prompt box instead of a Val more tutorial style onboarding experience. And they can, of course, skip that and use the manual, I just want to code kind of onboarding flow, but now Townie is front and center. And then, as always, there's just a few corner cases and rough edges that we've ironed out in Townie, things like duplicating messages when you stop Townie mid-response and stuff like that. And then along similar lines, some improvements to the CLI. So thanks to JP and Hala for bringing a couple sort of login frictions to our attention there. Sort of in bigger news, though, is the Val Town standard OAuth middleware. And I'll jump to that Val, close Townie here. Maybe I'll just open this demo in a new tab. So you can add this login with Val Town button and full OAuth middleware wrapper to any of your vals. And I'll show you what it looks like. So it's typical OAuth permission screen, and then I'm logged in with my Val Town handle. And so this is great because for internal tools where you have sensitive data or just anything that you want to be private, you can now still have a public-facing URL, like we have a custom subdomain here, and wrap and authenticate everything so that you have to have authorized users on your team, for example, or just anyone with a Val Town account, however you want to sort of gate your Val. Let me get back to the changelog. So thanks to Cole for sort of nudging us and pushing for this feature. Cole was featured in the Talk of the Town last month as well, or last week rather, for some cool vals he made. And speaking of auth, but sort of from another angle, we are migrating from clerk to better auth. And so probably something you won't notice too much, but let us know if you do run into any bugs there. There have been some stability issues and downtime with clerk over time. And so we're optimistic that better auth will be a smoother authentication provider. And there might be another blog post with more detail on that coming from Tom soon. So keep an eye out there. Here's another one, sort of housekeeping, but something you might want to take action on. Previously, any errors that came from vals or that occurred in vals would be emailed to you, and that just sort of created an overload of email. And so we actually switched that so that the errors now only show up on val.town in the browser, but you can opt back in to error emails as I have here, website and email, website only, or no notifications at all. And you can do it whenever an error occurs or only the first time. So that will require some action if you do want those emails. Just a heads up there. And then moving on to the dashboard. So when you're logged into Val Town, I'll pull this up again. Previously, you could see all your vals from your own account and your work account and just any other orgs that you were a part of. And now we have this switcher, so you can go between different orgs. And it was sort of a long time coming now that so many people are using Val Town, both at work and personally. Another one here, email triggers. So when you have a val that is an email handler and it gets a bunch of data from inbound emails, now that data includes a headers property. And thanks to DT to David for nudging us to add that feature. Moving along, DB Pro is a database desktop GUI that is available on Mac, Windows, and Linux. And when you want to go beyond sort of the admin panel SQLite within the Val UI, which I can show, let me grab one that has SQLite. Yeah, so there's sort of a lightweight SQL GUI within the Val editor view here. But then DB Pro is a great option for power users who want an even more powerful UI. and they have a blog post sort of detailing how to set that up. Last couple things here, we upgraded to Dino 2.7.5 as the runtime from 2.5.5. And then lastly, we have a new alternatives page. And so this sort of relates to some of the work Steve wrote about in his investor update, sort of positioning Val Town against different dev tools, things like hosting providers, but also browser-based code editors, AI builders, and other software. And so it's kind of a way for us, and then also for anyone evaluating Val Town against other providers to think about how it fits into the ecosystem. Thanks to Justin, who wrote a really nice alternatives page for Button Down as just kind of a thoughtful model for how to do that well. That's it for this changelog, and thank you for watching.